Mr. Kingsley, let me introduce you. This is my older sister. In the lavish corridor outside the bridal suite, Sloane, my younger sister, draped in a stunning Vera Wang wedding gown, called out in a shrill voice. The man she had just stopped was Harrison Kingsley, the powerful chairman of the Kingsley Group, the most prestigious luxury hotel and resort empire in America. Gripping my arm tightly, Sloane yanked me forward with a radiant plastic smile. As you can see, she's a defective product of our family. She has absolutely no education and only knows how to play in the dirt. Standing right beside her, my parents hastily flashed sycophantic smiles to chime in. We really have nothing to be proud of with this one. Sloane is the sole pride of our family, so please excuse her crude presence. I stood frozen, unable to utter a single word. Instinctively, I hid my rough, soil-calloused hands deep in the pockets of my vintage suit jacket. My eyes darted away and happened to land on an expensive potted olive tree in the corner of the hallway. The angle of its lowest branch looked a bit constricted, but how could I ever speak up in a place like this? Only Chairman Kingsley's ice-cold gaze in that moment burned itself into my mind. Little did I know, that humiliating moment would be the starting gun, the signal that finally broke the curse called family that had bound me for decades. Welcome to Footsteps of Tomorrow. This is our time to share the little rays of light in our daily lives, or the precious thoughts hidden deep within our hearts. If you are willing, please stay and listen for a while. Maeve, come home this weekend. My mother's voice through the phone always carried a dictatorial tone that allowed no refusal. To someone who had just gotten off work and stripped off a mud-stained jumpsuit like me, that voice sounded horribly dry. "What is it, Mom?" I asked, but she brushed me off, saying there was something very important to discuss, abruptly set the time for 2 o'clock on Sunday afternoon, and hung up. I am Maeve, 48 years old. People usually call me a gardener, but I always define myself as a landscape architect. Listening to the voice of the earth, reading the soul of the stones, and turning a client's vision from a small potted plant to a sprawling ecological garden into reality is my life's work. I have pursued this profession for over 20 years. My late grandfather did the same work, and I grew up watching his broad, steady back. A man who loved plants with all his heart and silently conversed with the soil was the greatest pride of my life. However, in the eyes of my parents and younger sister, my job was not only far from a point of pride, but a stain on the family. My father was a former mid-level manager at a financial firm, and my mother was a socialite who cared only for her country club luncheons. Both valued appearances above all else. Then there was Sloane, my sister, 20 years my junior, who was blessed with stunning beauty from a young age and grew up wrapped in my parents' absolute indulgence and expectations. Graduating from a prestigious private university and now working as a public relations specialist for a major fashion brand in New York, Sloane was their golden child. As for me, I never went to college, choosing instead to follow the path of landscape design inherited from my late grandfather. That choice alone dictated my lowly position in this house. On Sunday afternoon, carrying an expensive box of artisanal pastries, I stepped onto my parents' porch. "Oh, you're here," my mother said as she opened the door, frowning the second she saw my face. She immediately grabbed a can of Lysol she kept on the entryway console and began spraying my shoes and clothes relentlessly. "Mom, please stop," I grimaced, but she immediately shot back that I always reeked of dirt. She told me to stay put on the doormat and not dare step inside to dirty the Persian rug in the living room. From inside, Sloane, wearing a designer floral dress, lazily peeked out. "You're still dressing as trashy as ever, huh? Good thing you're here, I have this for you." She tossed a massive black trash bag toward me. It was stuffed with flashy designer clothes she had probably grown tired of wearing. "You're almost 50. Dress decently for once. It's disgusting to look at you." That thoughtless cruelty was the standard way this family had always treated me. Without being invited into the living room, I stood rooted in the foyer as my mother cut straight to the chase. "The thing is, Sloane is getting married." Her voice trembled with unconcealable excitement. "Really? Congratulations. Who is the groom?" I asked. "He's the heir to the Kingsley Group." Kingsley, the most luxurious chain of hotels and eco-resorts in the United States, a true empire. While I was still stunned, my father walked out of the living room, lifting his chin smugly. "Sloane has truly lived up to our expectations. Unlike you." His eyes flicked down to my sneakers, which still bore faint traces of dried mud. I knew full well that at family gatherings, my father always lied about my profession. waving it off as freelance consulting to make it sound less like manual labor. The wedding is next month. Naturally, it will be an incredibly grand affair at the Kingsley Grand Hotel, my mother added, adjusting her posture. I looked at my sister lounging on the sofa and offered my congratulations. Sloane didn't even look up from her phone screen, merely scoffing and stating that for someone of her caliber, marrying into such a family was a given. That arrogant attitude was the direct result of my parents' unconditional coddling. The cold glares directed at me and the warm affection showered on Sloane were an everyday reality under this roof. When I turned to leave, Sloane shoved the trash bag of clothes back into my hands, whispering sharply in my ear, "Dress properly for the wedding. Don't you dare show up looking like a hired hand. If the Kingsleys think less of our family because of you, you'll pay for it." Those words sliced into my heart like a sharp blade. Was the status of this family really determined by me? I wanted to snap back, but I swallowed the words. I had lived this way since childhood, craving my parents' affection, yearning for a little tenderness from my sister, and so I simply endured it, time and time again. On the way home, my footsteps were heavy. Sloane's marriage should have been a joyful occasion, but I knew that once they reached such a glittering upper-class world, their judgment of me would become even harsher. A dirt-stained worker like me would become an even bigger stain they would want to hide. Looking up at the overcast sky, I thought it looked just as bleak as my future. It was just a week before the wedding. As usual, I was in the greenhouse at my nursery, completely absorbed in looking at a rare dwarf Colorado blue spruce. For 10 years, I had poured my heart into pruning and wiring it. The trunk exuded a rugged resilience, as if it had survived blizzards in the Rocky Mountains, yet its upward-reaching branches were brimming with life. I had planned to give it to Sloane as a wedding gift. No matter how much I was mocked, I still harbored a fragile hope that the quiet beauty and fierce vitality of this tree might touch some corner of my sister's soul. My late grandmother's words echoed in my mind, that no matter what happens, family must cherish one another. She was the only one who accepted me for who I was, always smiling kindly as she watched me play in the dirt. My promise to her had inadvertently become iron shackles locking my heart. Over the weekend, I wrote a check for $3,000 and carefully placed it into an elegant, thick card as a wedding gift. I wore a newly bought blouse and skirt, trying to look as presentable as possible, and drove to my parents' house, just hoping not to be called trashy or disgusting for one day. As I stepped onto the porch and raised my hand to ring the doorbell, I froze. Whispered arguing was slipping through the crack of the door. It was my mother, my father, and Sloane. What are we really going to do about Maeve? In front of the Kingsleys, I just want to hide her existence completely. My mother's voice was fraught with anxiety. My father replied coldly, "Just tell them she suddenly fell terribly ill and can't make it. Having her absent is the safest bet." My heart felt as if it had been plunged into a bucket of ice water, shrinking tightly. They were plotting how to hide their eldest daughter, the family's disgrace, from the eyes of high society. I held my breath, hoping Sloane would object. I was her flesh and blood sister, after all. But the words that came out of Sloane's mouth were cruel beyond imagination. "Why not, Mom and Dad? Let her come." Her voice dripped with twisted amusement. "Isn't this the perfect opportunity to show the Kingsleys how excellently I've risen from such a pathetic environment? Having a ragged older sister in the background will only skyrocket my value. She's the perfect foil." In that moment, an invisible string snapped in my head. The fragile hope I had clung to for years that one day my family would understand me was effortlessly severed by Sloane. A perfect foil, a symbol of inferiority. That was my sole purpose in this house. I couldn't ring the doorbell anymore. I didn't have a single ounce of strength left. The card in my hand suddenly felt incredibly heavy and freezing cold. This money, the tree I had nurtured for 10 years, none of it meant anything to them. My very existence was a stumbling block to their glorious future. I turned and walked away silently. Grandma's dying wish to cherish family echoed in my mind like a distant, hollow sound. "I'm sorry, Grandma. I can't keep this promise anymore," I whispered to myself as I dragged my heavy feet back to my apartment. That night, I sat alone in the dark, without turning on the lights, my heart completely empty. For the next few days, I buried myself in work to crush the restlessness in my chest. Mixing soil, pruning branches, setting stones only when my mind was blank from physical labor could I forget my sister's sharp laughter. But occasionally, the phrase perfect foil pierced my heart like an invisible splinter. I still hadn't RSVP'd to the wedding. I didn't want to go, but if I didn't, they would just use it as an excuse to berate me for having no manners. and heaven knows what lies they would spin to the Kingsleys. While resting in a corner of the nursery, the phone in my pocket buzzed. Looking at the caller ID, I unconsciously furrowed my brow. Kingsley Hotel Aspen Development Office. This number had been calling me repeatedly over the past few days. It was an invitation to design the landscape for a massive eco-resort project. I hadn't formally accepted yet, so they were likely calling to follow up. But right now, I had no energy to answer. My soul was oversaturated with family drama. I powered off the phone, wanting only to quietly face the damp scent of the earth in front of me. That night, I stood before the small memorial on my mantel, where a picture of my grandmother smiling warmly sat next to a lit candle. She was the only one who supported me on this path, always taking my dirty hands in hers and telling me I had magic hands that could bring a dying plant back to life. That warmth I could never forget. "Grandma, what should I do?" I asked in silence. The words she spoke on her deathbed about the unbreakable bond of blood now felt like heavy iron chains. Would breaking these chains to live alone be a betrayal to her? The terror of becoming completely isolated in this world enveloped me like a freezing fog. After days of agonizing, I made a decision. I would go to the wedding. Not to reconcile, and certainly not to accept my role as Sloane's stepping stone. I was going to put a final period to this chapter of my life, and to fulfill my promise to my grandmother in my own way. I carefully wrapped the blue spruce I had nurtured for a decade in burlap. No matter how much it was trampled upon, this tree possessed a fierce vitality. I would use it as my final gift to Sloane. By giving it away, my role as the older sister would officially end. Thinking of this, my heart found a strange sense of peace. On the day of the wedding, I pulled a vintage Dior suit from the back of my closet, a piece left to me by my grandmother. A subtle beige suit, not ostentatious, but exuding an elegant pride. I pinned my hair up and put on the suit. Looking in the mirror, I saw a different woman. There was no smell of soil, no dirt stains, but hidden beneath the sleeves were hands covered in countless scars, calloused and tough, with the color of the earth embedded deep in the skin. These hands were the testament to my life. I clenched my fists tightly, telling myself that no matter what happened, I would never let go of the pride these hands had built. Holding the potted tree, I opened the door and stepped out. The Kingsley Grand Hotel was like another world. Giant crystal chandeliers illuminated the main lobby, and impeccably dressed people walked across polished marble floors. Everyone belonged to a glamorous echelon that I did not. When I asked for directions to the family waiting room, the concierge politely pointed me down a long corridor. As I walked, my footsteps suddenly halted. At the end of the hall, under soft lighting, sat a magnificent, centuries-old olive tree. Its rugged bark and manicured canopy were breathtaking, clearly a priceless masterpiece. However, occupational habit made me mutter aloud, "The angle of the right branch is a bit constricted. If left like that, the vitality of the entire tree will be compromised." "Oh, you actually came. What are you mumbling about over here?" A sharp voice rang out from behind. I startled and turned around. Sloane, in her pristine white wedding gown, my father in a formal tuxedo, and my mother in an expensive evening gown, were glaring at me with disgust. "Dressed this poorly, and you still showed up," Sloane sneered, scanning my classic suit from head to toe. "Well, it's slightly better than your work overalls. But what are you wandering around for? Just find a corner, stand still, and erase your existence." My father snapped. "If the Kingsleys look at you funny, it'll bring disaster upon us." My mother glanced around nervously, terrified that someone would see me, her family's walking disgrace. I bit my lip and said nothing. Just then, a deep, commanding voice echoed, "Excuse me, are you the parents of the bride?" The owner of the voice was a man in his 60s, exuding an aura of absolute authority. He wore a flawless Tom Ford suit, his sharp eyes seeming to pierce through to the very essence of everyone in front of him. "Mr. Kingsley." Sloane's voice instantly morphed into a sugary, fawning tone. It was the chairman of the Kingsley Empire. My parents scrambled to stand up straight and offered eager handshakes. "It is an absolute honor." But in the next second, Sloane did the unthinkable. With a radiant smile on her face, she grabbed my arm and dragged me right in front of the chairman. "Mr. Kingsley, let me introduce you. This is my older sister." And without a shred of hesitation, she delivered her insult. "As you can see, she's a defective product of our family. She has absolutely no education and only knows how to play in the dirt." My parents immediately chimed in. "Please excuse her crude presence. Sloane is the sole pride of our family." Time seemed to stop. The ambient noise was sucked into a vacuum. I just stared at the floor, even my feelings of resentment and humiliation completely paralyzed. Instinctively, I clenched my rough hands and hid them inside my jacket sleeves. At 48 years old, in front of my parents and sister, I still couldn't escape the curse of being the worthless failure. That pathetic realization consumed my entire body. "Oh, Mr. Kingsley whispered. I timidly glanced up at his face and realized that every trace of social pleasantry had vanished from the chairman's expression. His eyes were glued to me more precisely, to the sleeves where I was hiding my hands. His gaze was ice cold, piercing straight through my soul. A second later, he withdrew his gaze with a perplexed look, gave a curt nod to Sloane and my parents, and said a single word, "Excuse me." Then he turned and walked away without another word. Watching his retreating back, Sloane and my parents exchanged smug smiles. They probably thought their plan to elevate themselves by trampling on me had been a resounding success. But in my heart, Chairman Kingsley's frozen expression lingered. It wasn't a look of contempt or indifference. It was a sharp gleam carrying some entirely different emotion. As soon as the chairman left, Sloane, with a satisfied smirk, grabbed my arm again. The grip was harder this time, forcefully yanking me along. "Follow me. We have important business." Sloane dragged me from the luxurious corridor into a dim, concrete fire escape stairwell. My parents casually trailed behind. The vibrant sounds of the reception were left behind in another world. This place was chillingly quiet. "Sign this." Sloane pulled a piece of paper from her designer clutch and shoved it in my face. The header was printed in cold, mechanical letters. Family termination and non-disclosure agreement. "What is this?" My voice was so thin and shaky it startled even me. "Read it and weep. As of today, you are no longer my sister and have absolutely nothing to do with this family. Sign your name," she said, already holding out a pen. My father crossed his arms and said coldly, "Your very existence is a stain on the Kingsley name. Consider this our mercy. Just sign it." My mother put on a tearful face and pleaded, "Maeve, I'm begging you. For your sister's happiness, just step away. This is the first and last time you can actually repay this family." Repay this family. Those words weighed heavily on my chest, essentially judging everything I had ever done as an act of ungratefulness. They were absolutely certain I would cry and obediently sign this absurd paper, because for decades, I had always submitted to them. The humiliation and emptiness crept up from my heels, but deep down, I still held onto a spider silk thread of hope. I clutched the burlap-wrapped potted spruce. I thought, if they just saw the stunning vitality of this tree, maybe they would realize our blood bond was still there. With trembling hands, I unwrapped the burlap and gently offered the plant to Sloane. "Here is your wedding gift," I uttered my final plea. But that hope was shattered in the most brutal way imaginable. Sloane looked at the tree as if looking at a pile of garbage. Her face contorted as she screamed, "What the hell is this? Don't bring this foul-smelling trash into my new life." In the next instant, Sloane slapped the pot out of my hands. A sharp crash echoed as the artisanal ceramic pot shattered into pieces on the concrete steps. The soil I had painstakingly cultivated spilled everywhere. A beautifully wired branch snapped and rolled onto the floor. At that exact moment, I heard a distinct snapping sound in my own mind. My lingering attachment to family, my desperate craving for my parents' love, my foolish expectation of a day of understanding, all of it shattered into fragments, falling onto the cold concrete along with the broken ceramics. I no longer felt sadness or anger. None of it mattered anymore. My sister laughing triumphantly, my parents watching it as a matter of course, the contract lying on the floor, all of it became something belonging to an alien world that had nothing to do with me. "Oops!" My hand slipped. "Sorry about that, sis." Sloane faked a gasp, covering her mouth like a tragic heroine in a play. My parents looked at the scattered dirt like it was garbage, nobody sparing a single thought for my bleeding heart. But this was for the best. My soul was now as still as a frozen lake, reflecting no emotion whatsoever. "What is going on here?" A deep, authoritative voice suddenly echoed from behind. I turned to see Harrison Kingsley standing there with a stern expression. He must have heard the commotion and come to check. Sloane instantly changed her face, switching to her sweet, whining voice. "Oh, Mr. Kingsley, it's nothing major. My sister just accidentally dropped her things." "Your sister accidentally dropped it?" "Mr. Kingsley cut her off. His eyes were locked onto the floor, where the blue spruce lay dying amidst the dirt. In that moment, I saw the chairman take a sharp breath. His eyes widened in shock, and then he immediately shifted his gaze to my face to confirm something. And when he saw my scarred, rough hands peeking out of my suit sleeves, his expression froze entirely. Impossible. Is it really you? This is completely beyond expectation, Mr. Kingsley murmured, his voice strained. Sloane and my parents naturally didn't understand the meaning behind his words. Sloane hastily tried to salvage the situation. Dad, don't worry. I'll have someone clean up this trash immediately. I'm so sorry you had to see this eyesore. Stop right there. The chairman's roar echoed like thunder in the stairwell. Sloane physically jumped. Mr. Kingsley pushed past her, walked slowly toward me, and stopped right in front of me. As Sloane, my parents, and I watched in absolute shock, the man standing at the pinnacle of the Kingsley empire took off his glasses, took my rough hands in both of his, and looked me directly in the eye with profound reverence. Evelyn, the legendary landscape architect our Kingsley Group has been chasing for 3 years for our Aspen Eco Resort project, only to be constantly rejected. Miss Evelyn, I never imagined you would appear here under these circumstances. Absolute silence consumed the space. Evelyn. That was my professional name, a name I had borrowed from my beloved late grandmother. Legendary architect? I saw the blood drain completely from Sloane's face. The mocking smiles on my parents' faces turned to stone. Mr. Kingsley slowly let go of my hands and shot a dagger-like glare at Sloane and my parents. Word by word, he ground out his suppressed fury. The hands of the ladies standing before you are not stained with trash. They are a national treasure that has created world-class living works of art. A family that dares to trample on the life created by this treasure and dares to look down on their own flesh and blood as bottom feeders. The Kingsley family will absolutely never demean ourselves by associating with a family possessing such a rotten core. The crushing weight of reality delivered a fatal blow to the 3 people standing there. Sloane let out a meaningless whimper and collapsed to her knees, not caring that her expensive wedding dress was dragging in the dirt. My parents stood frozen against the wall, trembling violently, not even daring to cry out loud. I could clearly see the cold despair crushing them. The stairwell was drowned in a bizarre silence. Sloane looked up at me with empty eyes. Her previous arrogance had evaporated without a trace, leaving only 3 pathetic figures pulverized by a brutal reality. Mr. Kingsley shot them one last cold glance before turning back to me, maintaining his utmost respect. Miss Evelyn, the reason we have yearned to meet you for years without success. I finally understand. You have been enduring the torment of your own family. I am truly sorry for continuing to send offers without knowing your situation. His absolute sincerity and profound respect made me shake my head gently. Please don't say that, Mr. Kingsley. It is not your fault. My voice sounded so calm it surprised even me. Liars, Sloane rasped. Liars! How could my trashy, dirt-covered sister be a legend? It was the scream of someone refusing to accept the truth that the sister she had always despised was the great figure her future father-in-law had been begging for 3 years. The ultimate irony had shattered her vanity into dust. Sloane crawled over, sobbing and grabbing at my legs. Maeve, I'm sorry. I was stupid. Please say something to Mr. Kingsley. My wedding is going to be ruined. Before she could touch me, Mr. Kingsley stood like a fortress between us. Don't you dare touch her with your filthy hands. His guttural voice froze Sloane in place. The insults and atrocities you have inflicted upon her today are unforgivable. The chairman's final verdict allowed no argument. Ignoring the chaos, I knelt quietly on the floor, carefully picking up the pieces of the broken ceramic pot. The spruce lay in the dirt. I gently picked up the snapped branch. I didn't feel sad anymore. Only a quiet, deep pity for a life that had been stripped away spread through my chest. I slowly stood up, carefully wrapping the broken branch in the burlap, and for the first time, I looked straight into the eyes of my parents and sister. This tree has been with me for 10 years. Through every season, my voice echoed evenly in the stairwell. My only wish was to use it to bless your wedding, but it seems that intention was never going to reach you. Under my gaze, the 3 of them only shrank back in fear. It's over, I declared clearly. As of today, the ties between us are as shattered as this ceramic pot. Please, never appear in front of me again. It wasn't anger. It wasn't tragedy. It was just a quiet farewell stating an undeniable fact. Having said that, I turned to Mr. Kingsley and nodded. Sir, I am truly sorry, but I cannot stay in this place any longer. If you'll excuse me. Of course, Miss Evelyn. The chairman nodded understandingly, gently gesturing for me to walk ahead. Allow me to escort you to the exit. I followed his lead. What expressions my parents and sister wore as they watched us walk away, I didn't bother to turn around and check. Guided by Mr. Kingsley, I walked through the employee corridors to the loading dock at the back of the hotel. In contrast to the glamour out front, this place was quiet and functional. The chairman apologized repeatedly. Miss Evelyn, I am deeply remorseful. I never dreamed your family treated you this way. I will strictly educate my son on how to judge character. No, you don't need to apologize, I replied calmly. The ones at fault are those who relied on blood ties to trample on my dignity. Mr. Kingsley said nothing more, only nodding with a look of deep empathy. Standing before the exit doors, I turned and gave him a grateful nod. Thank you for today. And regarding the Aspen project, before I could finish, he hastily waved his hand. No need, Miss Evelyn. You don't have to worry about that project right now. Please just take some time to rest. I will officially contact you again in a few days. Naturally, if you change your mind because of today's events, we will accept that. His kindness warmed my heart slightly. Thank you. Goodbye, then. I pushed the door open and stepped outside. The crisp air hit my flushed cheeks, bringing a soothing sensation. Looking back, Mr. Kingsley was still standing by the door, giving me a respectful nod in farewell. I nodded in return and walked toward the train station. What happened to the wedding after I left, I didn't know. But based on Mr. Kingsley's attitude, the glorious future Sloane and my parents had dreamed of was certainly never going to materialize. The facade and vanity they worshipped above all else had collapsed into dust. Riding the train home, I stared absently out the window, the scenery blurring past. I still held the broken spruce branch wrapped in burlap tightly in my hand. Throwing it away would be easy, but doing so would mean denying 10 years of my own dedication. I decided to take this branch home. Even though it had been broken, its life was not entirely extinguished. With proper care, it would surely sprout roots and thrive again. That thought seeped into my empty soul, bringing a tiny ray of light. That night, in my silent apartment, I worked diligently alone. Using a very sharp knife, I made a clean cut on the broken end of the branch and carefully applied a rooting hormone. I wrapped it in damp sphagnum moss and gently planted it in a new pot. It was a basic propagation technique. When everything seems to be lost, life begins anew right from that spot. My grandfather's favorite saying echoed in my mind. I would use my own hands to nurture this tiny life once more. As I made that vow, a warm tear rolled down my cheek. It wasn't a tear of sorrow or bitterness, but perhaps a tear of relief, of finally breaking free from the curse that had weighed on me for decades. A few days later, I received a FedEx package from Harrison Kingsley. Inside was a formal letter of apology along with a landscape design contract for the new eco-resort in Aspen. Looking at the compensation figure, I was dizzy. It was astronomically large. A postscript at the bottom read, "The wedding proceeded as a private, internal affair." However, the Kingsley family has declared a termination of all financial support or any special privileges to their family. I am reporting this so you are aware of the situation. I finished reading and quietly placed the letter on the table. The path they would walk from now on had nothing to do with me. I will use these hands to build my own beautiful world, I promised myself. Since receiving Mr. Kingsley's letter, my life became astoundingly peaceful. The relentless calls from my mother vanished completely. The hateful text messages from Sloane ceased. Time flowed smoothly, like the calm after a massive storm. I pushed them out of my mind and threw myself into my work. The Aspen Resort was undoubtedly going to be the biggest project of my career. Spreading out the blueprints and documents, the time I spent brainstorming was incredibly healing. Congratulations. Designing for a Kingsley hotel. That's huge. Sarah, a rare colleague and friend of mine, cheered genuinely. She had always vaguely sensed the issues between me and my family but had the grace never to pry. I deeply appreciated her tact. I haven't officially accepted yet, I replied modestly. There you go, being modest again. With your talent, you absolutely deserve it. You've got the golden touch. Sarah's carefree smile made my heart feel lighter. One late afternoon, coming home from work, I saw a familiar figure standing in front of my apartment door. Under the dim hallway light, my heart skipped a beat when I recognized my mother. She looked much more haggard, her hair noticeably grayer. Seeing me, she stepped forward hesitantly. Maeve. Her voice had lost its usual domineering edge. It was thin and pleading. "What is it?" I asked in a tone so cold it surprised even me. staring straight at her without a ripple of emotion. My mother flinched, choking on her words for a moment. Maeve, please put in a good word with Mr. Kingsley. A good word about what? Sloane. She's miserable. She's living on pins and needles with the Kingsleys. As a daughter-in-law, nobody even talks to her. They treat her like a piece of garbage, my mother sobbed. And your father. All his post-retirement consulting gigs were cancelled. It has to be Mr. Kingsley pulling strings behind the scenes. Your father is losing his mind, reaping what you sow. The words were on the tip of my tongue, but I swallowed them. Arguing with them was utterly pointless now. That has nothing to do with me, I said quietly. Didn't I tell you we cut ties, and asked you never to appear in front of me again? Don't say such cold-blooded things. We are mother and daughter. My mother lunged forward to grab my arm. I firmly but gently brushed her hand away. Exactly because we are mother and daughter. There are things that cannot be forgiven. You people murdered your daughter's soul for decades. You cannot escape that guilt. My unwavering stance left my mother stunned, rooted to the spot. I ignored her, unlocked my door, stepped inside, and decisively slammed it shut. The click of the deadbolt echoed loudly in the evening air. Through the door, I could hear my mother screaming something, but I didn't have the energy to even process her words. Eventually, the noise faded into silence. I stood in the dark without turning on the lights, holding my breath. My heart was strangely still. No sadness, no anger, not even a trace of pity. Just the solid realization that a relationship was completely over. Leaning against the door, I realized that if I chased my mother away today, my father might come tomorrow, or Sloane might do something crazy in a fit of hysteria. As long as they saw me as a convenient tool, this would continue. I was sick of it. Severing ties mentally wasn't enough. To permanently erase the past and protect my life, I needed concrete legal measures. The next day, I called Attorney Hayes, an old friend of my grandfather who knew a bit about my situation. Hearing my summary, Lawyer Hayes sighed heavily. I see. You've endured far too much, Maeve. His genuine sympathy almost brought me to tears. Mr. Hayes, I want to legally change my name, set up an independent trust to sever all financial ties, and become a total stranger to them in the eyes of the law. Mr. Hayes was silent for a moment before explaining gently. Maeve, changing your name and setting up a trust is entirely doable, but that doesn't completely erase blood rights. If you want to stop them from tracking you down or pulling your personal records, we can file for a restraining order based on harassment and petition to seal your personal information. But you have to understand, doing this means you are officially declaring yourself completely legally alone in the world. Are you prepared for that? Alone in the world. The weight of the phrase pressed down on my shoulders. It wasn't that I wasn't afraid, but from the moment my 10 years of devotion were crushed on those concrete stairs, my mind had been made up. Yes, I am ready, I said without hesitation. I understand, Mr. Hayes replied simply. Come to my office to discuss the details. I will find the best way to protect you. Hanging up, I let out a long breath, a new step forward. Though cold and heavy, it was undoubtedly the first step toward my own future. Gathering my spirits, I picked up Mr. Kingsley's letter and dialed the number. After a few rings, that familiar, deep voice answered. Hello, Kingsley speaking. Sorry for calling so abruptly. This is Evelyn. The moment I stated my name, the atmosphere over the phone seemed to brighten instantly. Oh, Miss Evelyn, I've been waiting for your call. How have you been? Thank you for your concern. I am doing very well. I'm calling today to give you my answer. I took a deep breath and stated clearly, the project in Aspen I am honored to accept. Really? That is fantastic. There is no better news. The chairman's joyous voice came through the earpiece. When can you arrange a site visit to Aspen? Anytime. Excellent. Let's discuss the schedule. The conversation flowed with a vibrant energy, a professional dynamic where I was respected as Evelyn, the landscape architect. Hanging up the phone, I glanced at the windowsill. The propagated spruce cutting sat quietly. Though it hadn't sprouted new buds yet, the tiny branch was definitely basking in the spring sunlight, trying to live. I, too, would start over with this tiny life. Pulling a large suitcase from the back of my closet, I started packing for Colorado. There was no more looking back. The atmosphere in Aspen carried a raw, majestic, and pristine quality, entirely different from the city I used to live in. An SUV from the Kingsley Group picked me up from the airport and drove straight to the project site. In the car, the project development director gave an apologetic nod. "Miss Evelyn, we are truly sorry. We had no idea you were the sister of the director's wife." It seemed the wedding incident had become a rumor within the company. I shook my head gently to reassure him. "Business is business. Private life is private life. Please don't worry about it." That immediately dispelled the tension in the car. The site was located on a hillside with a sweeping view of the majestic Rocky Mountains. The massive plot of land only had excavators digging the foundation. But the moment I stepped onto the dirt, the entire landscape concept flooded my mind. The distant mountain ridges, a towering, centuries-old ponderosa pine standing right in the middle of the property, and the babbling of a natural creek. I would preserve all of it, creating a serene and powerful garden where anyone who visited could find deep peace. The desire to create surged in my veins. "Magnificent," Mr. Kingsley murmured beside me. He had been quietly watching me pace the site, touching the soil barehanded and caressing the tree bark. "I assume you already see the completed garden in your mind." "Yes," faintly. I turned to him. "Mr. Kingsley, I have a few requests. Please absolutely do not cut down this ponderosa pine. Let's make it the centerpiece. And the creek. I want to preserve its natural flow as much as possible." The chairman nodded decisively. "Of course, Miss Evelyn. I give you full authority. This resort will only be complete with your garden." That absolute trust empowered me beyond measure. That night, I stayed in a luxury suite provided by the Kingsley Hotel. After dinner, I stepped out onto the balcony to enjoy the mountain breeze, listening to the chirping of insects. Freed from the shackles of my family, being able to immerse myself in the work I loved this time was unbelievably peaceful and fulfilling. Though what I lost was great, what I gained was equally priceless. Suddenly, my phone on the bed lit up. A new message. Seeing the sender's name, I unconsciously frowned. It was Sloan. "Where are you?" "Mom said you moved out. You're so cruel. Are you planning to abandon this family? My life at the Kingsleys is getting more tragic by the day, and it's all your fault. Have some responsibility and go beg the chairman. Isn't that the final duty of a failure of an older sister like you? Right to the very end, blaming others. Right to the very end, seeing me as a tool to be used." The message lacked even a shred of remorse. I finished reading, silently swiped the screen, and added Sloane's number to my blocked list. My parents' numbers suffered the same fate. From now on, their voices would permanently be erased from my world. With a single tap of a finger, a decades-long relationship vanished. Realizing this, instead of loneliness, I felt an exhilarating sense of liberation. Putting the phone down, I looked out at the hazy mountain range, where there was only moonlight, flora, stones, and silence. My days in Aspen were busy and meaningful. During the day, I was at the construction site, discussing rock foundations and soil improvements with the builders. Initially, the workers kept their distance, but gradually, my knowledge and skills earned their respect. "The way you set these stones, it's like they've been sitting there for thousands of years," a veteran stonemason marveled. In my heart, I thanked my quiet, stubborn grandfather, who had taught me everything hand in hand. At night, returning to my room, I'd call Lawyer Hayes to update on the legal proceedings. The name change and the establishment of the trust went through smoothly. Legally, I no longer existed in my parents' household records. The restraining order was also approved by the court based on my mother's harassment at my apartment. The legal fortress was built. "Are you truly not going to regret this?" Mr. Hayes asked over the phone. "Yes, I have no regrets," I answered firmly, and he didn't press further. One day, the management of my old apartment forwarded a package to me. Holding the envelope, I gasped when I saw the sender's name. It was the name of my late grandmother, who had passed away 10 years ago, written neatly on the front. With trembling hands, I opened it. Inside were several handwritten pages and an old bank passbook. My grandmother's familiar, rounded handwriting appeared. "My dearest Maeve, if you are reading this letter, it means Grandma is no longer in this world, and you must be suffering immensely because of our family." Just reading the first sentence, tears spilled from my eyes uncontrollably. She knew everything. She knew how I was ostracized, and she knew the day would come when the rope called family would strangle me. "Maeve, I'm sorry. Your grandfather and I enabled your parents to become weak people who only care about saving face. I'm sorry for leaving you alone to shoulder their selfishness." In the letter, She told me things I never knew about my parents' childhoods, and her profound regret. She ended the letter saying, "Maeve, from now on, please live your own life. Forget the curse I childishly placed on your shoulders about cherishing family. You have hands that can make the whole world bloom. This passbook is a small gift from Grandma to you. Use it to chase your dreams. From up in heaven, I will always pray for your happiness." I picked up the passbook with tear-soaked hands, a term deposit account under my name. When I saw the number, I was speechless again. $50,000. It was her pension money, saved penny by penny just for me, a love too massive to comprehend. The date the account was opened was exactly when I decided to follow in my grandfather's footsteps. She had believed in me and supported me long ago. Clutching the letter and the passbook to my chest, I sobbed loudly. I thought I was a loner, determined to live completely alone in this world, but I wasn't. There was always someone who understood me and gave me unconditional love from the deepest place in her heart. This warm truth melted the last layer of ice in my heart. My soul was now full. There was no more hesitation. I would walk my path with my head held high, with the hands she had always believed in. The work in Aspen progressed smoothly. My blueprints were met with overwhelming praise from Mr. Kingsley and the entire project board. The resort would open in a year, and I decided to stay in Aspen, pouring my soul into this project. One day, Mr. Kingsley called me into his office for a private conversation. With a serious face, he handed me a stack of documents. It was his son and Sloane's divorce papers. My son finally made his decision. This brief marriage was ultimately our fault as well. He paid a substantial alimony settlement to end things. That money might be a fortune to an average person, but compared to the high society life Sloane had dreamed of, it was nothing. "I see," I replied simply. My heart didn't waver in the slightest. It was just a story happening in a distant world that had nothing to do with me. The chairman continued apologetically. "I think I should also inform you about your parents' situation. According to Mr. Kingsley, my father had been using the Kingsley name to take under-the-table kickbacks, promising consulting gigs to acquaintances. But after the wedding, when the truth was exposed that the marriage was just a facade, those who had paid him didn't let it go. They sued for fraud, and my father lost all his credibility at work and his reputation in the neighborhood. My mother, unable to handle the shock, had fallen ill and was recuperating at home. The thin veil of status they worshipped had been ripped away mercilessly. A few days ago, they came looking for me," Mr. Kingsley grimaced. "They asked where you were. They know you are highly favored by me, and they wanted you to step in and save their family. Right up to the very end, they still saw me as a tool. I didn't even feel angry, just found it pathetic. Naturally, Mr. Kingsley didn't reveal my whereabouts and sent them away. I lowered my eyes. I didn't feel pity, just recognized the brutal truth that people are ultimately destroyed by the very things they cling to most. Miss Evelyn, I am truly sorry, Mr. Kingsley placed a hand over his heart. For dragging you into my family's mess, I will definitely make it up to you." "No, Mr. Kingsley," I smiled gently. "You did nothing wrong. On the contrary, I must thank you. Because you properly valued my work, I had the chance to start a new life. That was from the bottom of my heart. If Mr. Kingsley hadn't recognized me that day, I might still be suffocating under the curse of my family. Ironically, the marriage Sloane used to push me into hell accidentally became the life preserver that pulled me out. Karma is truly a cycle. My mind was no longer tethered to the past. Before me lay only a vast garden reaching into the future. The seasons cycled, and the garden in Aspen gradually took shape. Stones were set, soil was banked, water was routed, and hundreds of plants were meticulously planted by my own hands. Day after day, I soaked in mud and sweat. That dirty, grueling time was as sacred to me as a religious ritual. Plants never lie. However much effort you put in, they will grow strong and true. That honest rhythm of life watered my barren soul. One sunny afternoon, while I was tending to a sapling, a hesitant voice called from behind. "Excuse me, are you the architect, Evelyn?" Turning around, I saw an unfamiliar young woman, dressed simply but with very determined eyes. "Yes, I am." "Hello, I'm Hannah, the owner of a small nursery near your old home." Hannah. The name sounded familiar. I remembered my mother once sneering that the nursery only sold cheap flowers unworthy of her status. "I heard you cut ties with your family. I actually have something I want to give you. So I've been looking for you all this time." She handed me an old notebook. On the cover, in my mother's handwriting, it read, Gardening journal. These are notes on the flowers your mother secretly bought from my shop. She always came in hiding, afraid someone she knew would see her. Hannah's words stunned me. My mother gardening? The woman who considered dirt vile and lower class? Flipping through the notebook, I saw my mother's messy handwriting recording the names and growth of various flowers. Marigolds, petunias, pansies, all small, humble flowers I had mentioned liking when I was a child. Toward the last pages, a sentence made my heart clench. I can't make them bloom as beautifully as Maeve does. Her hands truly are magic. I finally understand that now. I want to see her. I want to say I'm sorry. Those words were perhaps the last clumsy, distorted fragment of love my mother had. But everything was too late. It could never be salvaged. She asked me to burn this notebook, Hannah said sadly. Because it was her only selfish act, she didn't want anyone to know. But I couldn't do it. I thought you needed to read it. I gently closed the notebook and handed it back to Hannah. I appreciate your kindness, but I don't need this anymore. I'll leave it to you to handle. My calm, resolute demeanor made Hannah nod in understanding. I understand. I will take responsibility for keeping it safe. She put the notebook in her bag, gave me a warm smile, and walked away. I watched her receding figure. The fact that my mother still harbored a tiny bit of guilt and regret stung my heart just a little, but that tiny thorn wasn't enough to shake my life anymore. I turned back to the sapling, gently pouring fresh soil over its roots. The past would remain permanently buried beneath this deep soil, silent and peaceful. A year later, the Kingsley Aspen Eco Resort officially opened amidst massive anticipation and grandeur. The heart of the entire project was the sprawling ecological garden I had designed. Evelyn's Garden, as it was named, captivated every visitor and received endless praise from critics worldwide. The press lauded it as a masterpiece, blending America's untamed nature with a refined, meditative artistry. Early the next morning, after the chaotic opening, I took a walk alone in the completed garden. The damp moss in the morning dew glowed like an emerald carpet. The babbling creek sounded like soothing music, and right in the center, the ancient ponderosa pine stood tall like a guardian deity protecting everything. I walked over, touching the rugged, powerful bark of the trunk. From that bark, I could feel the flow of hundreds of years of history. There was no longer a ripple of hatred or resentment toward my family in my heart. The old me, the daughter desperately craving love on those cold concrete stairs, had been entirely left behind, accepting the use of the law to permanently sever all ties, accepting the label of being completely alone in the world that was a steep price to pay. Even if the hole in my heart hadn't completely closed, I had no regrets. Suddenly, I looked toward a corner of the garden. There, a tiny but vibrantly alive plant was quietly thriving. It was the blue spruce branch Sloane had snapped that day, which I had brought back and propagated. Surviving the harsh winter, it had now sprouted lush, fresh buds. I crouched down, gently stroking the new leaves. I held up my soil-stained, heavily scarred hands to look at them. These hands, once deemed a disgrace by my family, were my entire fortune. Using these hands to touch the earth, set the stones, and plant the trees, I had built my own world. Miss Evelyn, a warm voice called out. Turning around, I saw Mr. Kingsley standing there with a radiant smile. The garden is magnificent, truly, thank you. This place is not just a treasure to the Kingsley Group, it is an American treasure. You flatter me. I stood up and shook his hand warmly. I am sincerely grateful to you for giving me this wonderful opportunity. Between us, it was no longer just a relationship between an investor and an architect, but a deep, unshakable trust. Blood ties are not everything. True connection between people is born from absolute respect for each other's way of life and professional soul. I will use these hands to continue nurturing beautiful worlds. The soft morning sunlight gently embraced the entire garden, and my soul along with it. Holding my head high with pride, I reached out my hands toward the new earth, ready to cultivate the next sparks of life.